31 feet, 1.2 seconds on the clock, and an entire week of grown men on television telling you this woman was already as good as gone. Think about that for a second. While the basketball internet was busy debating which city Caitlin Clark would be playing in next, she was in Washington, catching a loose ball, drifting way out past the arc, and releasing a shot that had absolutely no business going in. And it went in. 78-76. Indiana wins. The season breathes again, and every single voice that spent 7 days trying to ship her out of Indianapolis had to sit there and watch it happen in real time. That shot didn't just win a basketball game, it settled an argument. It answered a week's worth of noise with one of the most cold-blooded moments you'll see on a basketball court this season, or honestly, any season. And what makes it even more striking isn't the distance, it isn't the degree of difficulty, it's the timing. Because 3 days before that ball left her hand, she stood at a podium and told everybody to calm down. Then she went and made sure they had absolutely no choice but to. But here's the thing, before we get to the shot, before we get to the response, before we get to everything that happened on that court in Washington, you need to understand the full picture of what was being said about her, where it came from, who said it, and why every single word of it was built on nothing. Because this story isn't just about a buzzer beater, it's about what happens when a couple of loud voices decide to manufacture a narrative about the most important player in their sport, and then have to watch her make them look foolish in front of millions of people. Let's go back to the beginning. Before Caitlin Clark walked through the door in Indianapolis, the Indiana Fever were a punchline. Not a mean punchline, not a controversial one, just a quiet, forgettable one. The kind of team that existed on the edges of the conversation, mentioned briefly during draft coverage and then set aside until the following year. Their home games drew somewhere around 4,000 people on a good night. 4,000 in a building that seats over 17,000. You could hear the echo. Nobody outside of Indianapolis thought about them. Nobody had a reason to. They were operating at the bottom of the league in attendance, in buzz, in everything that makes a franchise feel alive. And then they had the first pick in the 2024 draft, and they used it on her. What happened next is the part that makes the trade rumor not just wrong, but genuinely embarrassingly absurd when you look at the numbers. 2 years ago, before Clark had played a single professional minute, somebody put a price tag on the Indiana Fever. $90 million. That was the valuation. $90 million for a franchise nobody was paying attention to, in a market people weren't exactly lining up to invest in. Today, that same franchise is valued at $560 million. Third most valuable team in the entire WNBA. A $470 million jump in 2 years. And you don't need a finance degree, a spreadsheet, or any kind of business background to connect the dots on what changed. One player walked through the door. One 24-year-old on a rookie contract, and the franchise went from $90 million to $560 million like someone flipped a switch in a dark room. So when you hear that this same franchise was supposedly in a hurry to send her away, keep that number in your head, $560 million, because we're going to come back to it. Here's where this whole thing actually started. And the more you look at the timeline, the more you realize how little it took to send half the basketball internet into a full spiral. Last Friday, a longtime television commentator named Jason Whitlock typed out a sentence and hit send. The Indiana Fever are planning to ship Caitlin Clark to the Los Angeles Sparks. He even had a prediction for who'd coach her once she got out there. That was the entire thing. No named source, no reporter backing it up, no insider information attached to it, just a sentence from a television voice who wanted to say something loud enough to get noticed. That sentence got 2 million views in a couple of days. 2 million people saw that post and reacted to it, shared it, argued about it, built entire conversations on top of it, and the whole time the foundation underneath it was just a guy with a microphone and an opinion he decided to present as information. That's the first piece of this.
The second piece came the same afternoon. A retired NBA player jumped into the conversation and announced he was hearing from a reliable source that the Fever didn't want Caitlin Clark anymore. He told the LA Sparks to go get her, and he said it with the kind of energy that suggested he had something real backing him up. Same urgency, same confidence, same total absence of anything resembling a verifiable source. And then it spread, because that's what these things do. Once two voices with platforms say the same thing in the same 24-hour window, the algorithm treats it like confirmation. People who hadn't even heard of Whitlock's original post were now seeing it repackaged, reshared, reacted to, built upon. The "Clark wants out" story had a life of its own before anyone stopped to ask where it came from. And here's the part that should make you genuinely angry if you care at all about how information moves in this sport. When reporters, actual reporters, the people whose job it is to make calls and verify things, finally traced the "Clark wants out" narrative back to its origin, they found an AI-generated video. No reporter, no source inside the building, no one with any connection to the Fever or to Clark's camp. A computer program and a thumbnail. That was the engine underneath this entire story. Sit with that for a second. The trade rumor that had a significant portion of the country convinced Indiana was about to make the single dumbest decision in modern sports history. The story that got 2 million views in 48 hours was built on a tweet with no source and a video made by a robot. That's not journalism. That's not even gossip with legs. That's noise that got amplified by people who should have known better, dressed up as insider information, and fed to millions of people who had no reason not to believe it. Here's the thing about manufactured narratives. They tend to fall apart the second someone with actual access starts asking questions. And that's exactly what happened here. While Whitlock's post was racking up views and the retired NBA player was telling LA to go make a move, the people who are genuinely plugged into this league, the reporters who cover it for a living, the insiders who've spent years building relationships inside these organizations, were looking at the whole thing and shaking their heads. One respected insider saw Whitlock's post and responded with a single line. He said the man was trying to break news for the first time in his life and that it should age well. That's not a refutation buried in qualifications. That's a flat-out dismissal from someone who knows how this league actually operates. A reporter who covers the business side of the WNBA, the contracts, the valuations, the franchise decisions, said he would be genuinely stunned if Indiana moved her. Not skeptical, not cautious, stunned. That's the word he used. Because when you understand what Clark means to that franchise on a purely financial level, the trade conversation doesn't just seem unlikely, it seems like something no rational front office would ever seriously consider. And when the reporters who are actually connected to the Fever, the ones who have relationships inside that building, who make calls to people who actually know what's happening, when they picked up the phone and started asking questions, the answer was immediate and unambiguous. There is no trade. There never was. Nobody inside that organization was shopping her. Nobody was fielding calls. Nobody was even having that conversation. The whole thing was fiction. Loud, viral, 2 million view fiction. But fiction. The contrast here is worth pausing on because it tells you something important about how sports media operates in 2025. On one side, you had two television voices, one a longtime commentator, one a retired player who said something explosive, got enormous engagement, and faced essentially zero accountability for the fact that none of it was true. On the other side, you had reporters who did the actual work, made the actual calls, got the actual answers, and their corrections got a fraction of the original rumor did. That's not a new problem, but it doesn't make it any less corrosive. Let's talk about what Caitlin Clark is actually worth to the Indiana Fever. Not in vague general terms, in specific, documented, verifiable terms that make the trade rumor fall apart the second you look at them. Start with the building. Before Clark, the Fever were playing in front of roughly 4,000 people a night. After Clark, they were selling out a 17,000-seat arena home game after home game.
And here's the detail that tends to stop people mid-sentence when they hear it. Last season, the Fever were drawing more fans to that same building than the Indiana Pacers, the NBA team, in the same city. The women's basketball franchise that nobody outside Indianapolis thought about 2 years ago was outpacing the NBA team in attendance.
Then there's the television piece, which might actually be the most staggering number in this entire story. This season, the league scheduled 41 of the Fever's 44 games on national television. 41! For context, that's more national TV games than the Los Angeles Lakers, more than the Boston Celtics, more than the Golden State Warriors, for a women's basketball team in Indianapolis. The league didn't do that because they love Indiana. They did it because every network that airs one of these games knows that Caitlin Clark drives viewership in a way that almost nothing else in professional basketball does right now. But the number that really reframes everything, the one that puts the entire trade conversation in its proper context, came from an analyst who studies sports economics professionally. He ran the numbers and found that Clark was responsible for more than a quarter of all the economic activity in the entire WNBA. One player, 25% of everything the league generates. And his projections suggested her impact could push past $1 billion in a single year, not for her team, for the league. One player moving $1 billion in economic activity for an entire professional sports league. And here's the punchline that should end every trade conversation before it even starts. She's doing all of that on a rookie contract that pays her approximately $78,000 this season. $78,000! Her own agent told ESPN that it would be essentially impossible to pay her what she's actually worth to this league, that no contract structure they currently have access to could come close to reflecting her real value. So the trade scenario the television voices were pushing looked something like this. Take the player responsible for a $470 million valuation jump. Take the player drawing more fans than the local NBA team. Take the player whose presence put 41 games on national television. Take the player generating a quarter of the entire league's economic activity on a $78,000 salary, and send her to Los Angeles. For what, exactly? Nobody who spread that rumor ever got around to answering that part, because there isn't an answer. There isn't a return package that makes sense. There isn't a scenario where Indiana comes out ahead. You don't trade the reason the lights came on. You protect her. You build around her. You make sure the whole world knows she isn't going anywhere. There's a certain understanding that used to exist in professional basketball, an unspoken rule about what you do when a generational player lands in your city. When Boston got Larry Bird, they didn't spend years debating whether he'd be better somewhere else. When the Lakers got Magic Johnson, nobody was floating trade scenarios to move him to a bigger market. When those cities got handed a once-in-a-generation talent, they circled the wagons. They built the team around that player. They made it abundantly clear that this person was theirs, and they intended to keep it that way. That's not sentiment. That's not romanticism about a sport. That's franchise management. Because once-in-a-generation players don't come around on a schedule. You don't get to decide you made a mistake and go find another one. When you have one, the job is to hold on. The job is to build. The job is to make sure every single day that player has every reason to want to stay. The Indiana Fever have a once-in-a-generation player, and not just once-in-a-generation for the WNBA, once-in-a-generation for professional basketball, full stop. The attendance numbers say it, the television contracts say it, the valuation jump says it, the economic impact numbers say it. Every single piece of data attached to this situation points to the same conclusion. What Indianapolis has right now is extraordinarily rare, and the correct response to having something extraordinary is to protect it. The idea that the franchise would instead be looking for the exit, that they'd be quietly shopping her around, taking calls from LA, exploring what a deal might look like, doesn't just contradict the financial reality. It contradicts every lesson this history of this sport has to offer about what you do with a player like this. And the people who run that franchise know it. That's why when reporters actually made calls, the answer wasn't "we're evaluating our options." The answer was, there is no trade. There never was. The door was never open.
While all of this was swirling, while the rumor was spreading, while the television voices were confidently predicting her next destination, while fans were arguing about it in comment sections and on social media and in group chats, Caitlin Clark was asked about it directly. A reporter put the question to her at a podium. "What do you make of all this noise? What's your response to the trade talk?"
What she did not do was issue a long statement through a publicist, release a carefully worded social media post, call a press conference to address it, go on a friendly podcast to clear the air. None of that. She stood at a microphone and said what she had to say in approximately 8 seconds. "I don't really know why we're still on this," she said. "The opinions," she said, "don't matter." And then the line that ended up traveling the furthest, the one that got picked up and shared and quoted back, she said she hoped it would make a lot of people just be quiet. And then, the part that summarized her entire response to the entire week, she said, "The sky is not falling. The sky is not falling." From the player they'd spent a week trying to bury, no drama, no visible frustration, no lengthy defense of herself or her relationship with the city. 8 seconds, a shrug, and a line that landed harder than most prepared statements ever do, because she meant it and it showed. She wasn't performing unbothered, she was actually unbothered. There's a difference, and it comes through on camera whether you want it to or not. That composure, that specific, quiet, unshakable composure is part of what makes her difficult to rattle and impossible to dismiss. The people trying to create chaos around her gave her a week's worth of material, and she responded with 8 seconds and a shrug. And then she went and backed it up in the most emphatic way available to her. 3 days after she told everybody the sky wasn't falling, the Indiana Fever were in Washington, tied into a game that felt like it was slipping away. The season was sitting at 5 wins and 5 losses. Not a crisis, but not a statement either. A wobbly record that gave every critic just enough to work with. And with the clock bleeding down to nothing, it looked like the night might end without resolution. Then the ball came loose. Caitlin Clark drifted, way out, past the three-point line, past the range where most players would even consider putting up a shot, out to a distance where you're essentially asking the ball to make a decision on your behalf. 31 feet from the basket, 1.2 seconds on the clock, down 1, the season watching, the entire week of noise hanging in the air. She let it go. 31 feet, 1.2 seconds, and it went through clean. 78-76, Indiana wins. 19 points for Clark. The answer delivered in the most direct possible terms, not through a microphone, not through a statement, not through an agent's carefully chosen words, but through a basketball leaving her hand from the parking lot and finding the bottom of the net before the buzzer sounded. There's something almost too perfect about the scheduling detail that follows. Those Los Angeles Sparks, the team that Jason Whitlock confidently declared she'd be playing for, the franchise the rumor said she was desperate to join, Indiana plays them at the end of this month. She'll suit up in a Fever jersey, walk onto the court, and face the team she was supposedly already packing her bags for, in the uniform the rumor said she'd already left behind. You genuinely cannot write a better ending to this story than the one the schedule accidentally provided. The rumor got 2 million views. The shot got the win. One of those two things actually happened. So here's where things stand. The Indiana Fever are back home at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and the building that used to echo with 4,000 people on a quiet Tuesday is now loud and packed and red night after night in a way that would have seemed like fantasy 2 years ago. The men who spent a week telling everyone she was as good as gone get to watch her run out of that tunnel in Indiana, at home, in the jersey they said she'd already left. They don't get to quietly move on from it. The schedule doesn't allow for that. Every time she makes a play like the one she made in Washington, and she will make more of them, the contrast between what was said about her and what she keeps doing becomes sharper and harder to ignore.
There's a larger question underneath all of this that's worth sitting with. When the people who are paid to analyze this sport, who have platforms and audiences and the responsibility that comes with both, decide that a city's best player should be somewhere else, and they say it loudly and confidently and without a shred of sourced information to back it up, and then that player answers them with a buzzer beater from 31 feet and a shrug at a podium, what does that tell you about who should be trusted to talk about this game? The rumor had momentum because it had volume, because two voices said it loudly enough and the algorithm did the rest, and by the time the people who actually knew the truth got their corrections into the conversation, millions of people had already formed an opinion based on a tweet and a robot. That's the dynamic that makes this frustrating beyond just the specifics of Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever. It's a window into how sports narratives get built and destroyed in real time, with no accountability on the back end for the people who built them wrong. She's still in Indianapolis. The franchise is worth $560 million. She hit a buzzer beater from 31 feet and shrugged, and the sky, just like she said, is still exactly where it was. Here's what I keep coming back to, and I genuinely want to know where you land on this. The voices that spent a week trying to run her out of Indiana, do they say a single word about that shot in Washington? Do they acknowledge what they got wrong? Or does the next loud take simply replace the last one, and nobody is ever held to account for the noise they made? Drop it in the comments, and watch what happens at Gainbridge. Watch how a city that was supposedly ready to let her go actually treats her when she comes home. Because if the last week has shown us anything, it's that the people inside that building have always known exactly what they have. The only people who didn't were the ones who never bothered to look at the numbers and decided to make noise instead.